So welcome to the Age and Disability Friendly March Forum, Embracing the End, Insights from a Doula. We're so glad to have you today, and we are going to be talking about things that maybe some of us are uncomfortable to talk about, and maybe some of us have experienced and are prepared to share their stories. Okay, well, let me just start off with a bit to put this into context, this conversation, and then introduce Jessica. Um, just want to say that in contemplating this forum and putting it together, we realize that can be very uncomfortable talking about what we don't understand, and it's easy to fear. And we don't talk about, a lot of us don't talk about death because it's so stigmatized, and we're removed from it now. It's removed from the normal processes of life, much more so than it was maybe 2 generations ago. So, whether we're afraid or just uncomfortable, or even thinking about how we become helpless at the end of life, um, much as we were when we were babies, um, you know, sometimes this conversation can be filled with emotion and filled with sometimes fear and anxiety. So, since we're not looking at death and life as one inseparable whole, we're also not preparing. Some of us are not preparing for it as much as we prepared for the birth of our children, if we had children. And this whole emergence and Jessica will talk more about this, about being embraced and being guided, and given the same strong support that we've got when we were having children, and that education and preparation and support, it's felt that that can really benefit us also at the end, and we'll hear so much more about that. So today we're going to have space for talking about death. We'll listen to what Jessica has to say about her personal experiences, and her journey to becoming a doula has been just as broad and multi-stepped as many of our own journeys in our lives. She started as a wilderness guide, and I really think that helps us to see how she leans into this connection with nature, with life. And maybe she'll talk more about that. She's a Marin parent, as she said, living in San Anselmo, a mother of three. And we're so glad to have you here, Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Would you like to put your slides up, or did you want to say a few things first?
Oh, I would love to do both, but I better do one at a time.
Okay.
Let me put
Okay.
my
We'll give you
slides
no
up.
rush.
Um, well, I think the first thing that I wanted to say was thank you, of course. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here to have a conversation about this. Speaking about death is really an act of reverence, an acknowledgement that there's something sacred in the transition, and the way that we leave, just as there is, in the way that we arrive, like Sarah was saying. And I invite you today to just, soften a little bit around that mystery and listen to the deeper wisdom that lives below our fear. And that's a challenging ask. And I try to do that myself every day in this work is, try to listen to my fear and acknowledge it, and also try to go beneath it and see what's there. So I would love to dive into telling you about my work and just introducing folks who don't know a lot about death doulas to a little more about what we do. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Okay. So a little more about me. My company is called Wild and Precious End of Life Services, and I support families directly. I also work through Marin Home Care, which is a home care agency based in Tiburon, and I volunteer with Suncrest Hospice. I also work in conjunction with a number of other hospices in my work, and we can talk more about the difference between what doulas do and what hospice does as we go along here. Uh, and I definitely try to come rooted in presence, compassion, and have conversations and help to bring comfort and connection during probably one of the most emotional times in people's lives. As many of you know, thanks to the poll, being bedside and being present for a passing is often a time when there is a high amount of emotion running through a family and a group of friends. So I try to come with presence and compassion, as I'm sure all of you do when you come bedside as well. And I'm very grateful to call San Anselmo home, though I travel throughout Marin and even up to Santa Rosa and San Francisco as well. So a little bit about what death doulas do. We are non-medical support. So death doulas do not provide advice on medical stuff. We provide emotional care, spiritual support, practical guidance, end of life planning, legacy creation. We are trusted resources, and above all, we help to honor final wishes. So we try to figure out what the final wishes are of the person who is passing, and we try to help the family and friends honor those final wishes. Um, why somebody would choose to work with a doula, very similar, like Sarah said, to like why someone may want a doula present during a birth. It's a time of a lot of fear and stress. So having somebody there who has been through it before can be very helpful. I often feel like when I go through something big, oh, I wish I had known what I know now before. And a doula is basically like bringing somebody in who has done this a whole bunch of times, hopefully. So they have a sort of a base of knowledge that they can come with. Um, Doulas are also able to support meaningful and peaceful transitions. It really depends case to case and family to family what is needed in order to provide that support, as you can imagine. We care for both the individual and their loved ones because when somebody is dying, everybody in the family and the friend group, everyone is affected. Um, we provide emotional, practical, and personalized guidance. And again, we help to ensure that those final wishes are known and honored. And it sounds like this group has done a lot of work on preparing, making sure you have all those documents and everything together. And one of the roles of a doula is to make sure that um, that what we know that the person wants spans beyond even maybe the practical and into the very nitty gritty of like, do they like to be touched? Would they like people to hold their hands? Do they want poetry read to them? Just really getting into like, who is this person and what do they want during this time period? Um, yeah. Uh, I think, and this is a little more about what I do. So I also want to point out that every doulas are not, it's not a regulated thing. There isn't one body of certification for doulas, and they don't all provide the exact same services. So some doulas only, Sarah and I were talking about this leading up to this conversation, they focus on creating celebrations. They focus on doing memorials. Other doulas may focus on different areas. This is where my focus is. I do all of these things. Most doulas do sort of several things. But when talking to a doula, you want to make sure that they're capable and able to provide the kind of services that you and your loved ones would benefit from. And I think that's all I have really for slides for right now. If that sounds good, I can stop share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so with the little bit you've heard, are there some questions or thoughts that you have? And if you do, just unmute yourselves and share or ask.
Jessica, I do have I have a couple questions. Um, so how does this intersect with the hospice team? what do you do that's the same or different? And I noticed you had bereavement as part of your drop-down list.
Yeah,
Um, and how do you function in the bereavement arena?
those are great questions. Thank you. Um, in terms of how I function with the hospice team, it depends hospice to hospice what their protocols are, but basically, a doula is a part of the care team. Sometimes they're even the quarterback, meaning that they may be in a role where the family would like them to be coordinating care. So hospice, for anybody just quickly who doesn't know, is a fantastic organization. Hospice is available to anybody who has Medicare, Medicaid, and they have 6 months or less to live. And a doctor has to sign off that that's the case for them to be eligible. Uh, Once that is the case, then hospice starts, they do an intake and then they can start visits. And as a person progresses towards active dying, hospice comes more and more frequently, up to once a day. But that's one visit once a day typically. So often families can benefit from even more support. And they might get that support from a home care agency where they're hiring like an assistant, or family members might be taking shifts helping out. And that coordination of care, for any of you who have been through it, can be a lot to figure out who's going to be here, and make sure that there's somebody present all the time to help take care of the person who's passing, and make sure they're not left alone. So a doula, for example, can provide that coordination of care. They can create the schedule. They can help coordinate not only the family members and when the hospice is coming, but also potentially when a neighbor can swing by and when somebody's coming to walk the dog, and help kind of coordinate all of those different things that go into taking care of somebody who's passing, and their household as well. Um, yeah. So that was one of your questions. Sorry, you had another good one. Can you remind me, Nancy, what was your other one?
It was about the bereavement.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yes, bereavement is the other side. And, people become bereaved before a person dies. This is like, so we call it anticipatory grief. And it's really important for doulas are able to basically help people know what's coming, right? In terms of the practical of like, what is the next stage of dying for this person going to look like? They also can help prepare the family for what needs to happen, and the patient for what probably is going to take place, and make people as comfortable as possible. Um, they can also coordinate bereavement services. So hospice, everybody should know, and it's an amazing thing about hospice, provides counseling for anybody involved in the passing of somebody who was on hospice for a year after. It might even be 18 months. It depends in different locations, but I'm sure that it's at least a year. Um, but often what I find is that patients' families, sometimes they don't want like to talk to a social worker. They don't want a therapist. They need to grieve in other ways. And so, for example, I had a family come to me last year. I didn't work with them during the passing. They had a stillborn, and it had been a year, and they asked for a memorial service. They wanted to do a memorial to commemorate the passing a year ago, and they were ready. And that's something that a doula can help with. So a doula can help create, like, what was their vision, and they wanted to be somewhere on the water near the bay, and even add ideas of like, would we want there to be music? Who would we want to be involved? You know, um, Stuff like that. So in terms of bereavement, there's a pretty big net, and it can be anything from memorials to resources. Like, I love to give people alternatives to traditional therapy, whether it's sound therapy or dance therapy, yoga for grief. Like, I know this sounds kind of like woo-woo, but different people really benefit from different ways of um, kind of internalizing their grief. And grief isn't something that we get over, right? It's something that we metabolize and becomes a part of us and makes us a new, stronger version of ourselves. So it's another thing that I feel like doulas hopefully are very closely in touch with that, and they can help their clients find the right resource for them.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Jessica. Jody, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Just by way of background, I was a social worker at the Redwoods for 8 years, so I watched a lot of people pass and helped, in the ways that that happens, support them. So my question is, as people probably know, hospice is 6 months, but it can be extended, and dying is not all that predictable.
Yeah.
Sometimes it happens very quickly, sometimes it goes for a long, long time. So uh, I'm just curious, like, how do you make those arrangements with a family? Is it kind of
Yeah.
a sort of number of hours, or depending on the actual role, do you actually sit vigil when people are
Yeah.
dying? Are you on call for that? So I'm just curious about kind of how that might, how the scope of how that might play out in terms of a family, um, or somebody dying alone. I mean, I've
Yeah.
had people who had
Yeah.
no one around
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
How does that kind of play out in the work that you've done, or what might people expect, or
Yeah, those are great questions. And that's a great, I mean, you're a font of experience. Wow. What a resource. So It it depends family to family what they need, but often if it's earlier stage, a doula can be used like for a conversation once a month, just to check in, like an initial expectation setting, maybe making sure in case things go faster than we expect that we have all of that person's wishes gathered, and we've had the conversations with the different family members who are going to be present so that they're aware of what those wishes are as well, right? Um, and then it could be just a monthly conversation again, like, or even less. It really depends, like family to family. I have patients who are under conservatorship, so they don't have any family at all, and they're in facilities. And I go see them more often than that just because they don't have anybody. And really there I'm providing companionship. And their conservator has asked me to do that. And I do that through hospice. I also do that for folks who don't have conservatorship and are previously unhoused. And I do that as a volunteer role. So folks who don't even have Medicare, who basically have nothing. Um, and that's something that some doulas may do. That's something that some of you may do. I mean, like that's an opportunity. There's a great program at the hospital here in Marin, at Marin General, that's called No One Dies Alone. That takes volunteers and loves volunteers just to be with people. As a doula, I also do provide vigil services. So meaning that I will sit with somebody who is passing, if they don't have somebody, or just if the family wants me to be there, or they don't want the person to be alone at all for 24 hours, and it's only one or two people. So they don't, there just aren't the hour, they need to sleep, and they want somebody to come and be with their person in case something changes, that kind of stuff. So it's very flexible. I typically work on a package of hours where I kind of have my clients buy like a lump of hours, and that way they don't have to be stressed about like, is this one of my hours or isn't? Like, is this counting? Um, because again, my goal is really like service, and I can be pretty flexible about the exact hours that we're using, if that makes sense. And usually more hours towards the end of somebody's life than yeah, when things are just ticking along. As long as we've got sort of the plan, if that's tickety boo, then we can kind of back off, make sure everything is going okay, and then kind of come back in more towards the end.
Jessica, I'll get to you, Bobby, in just a second. I just want to state that from what you're saying and emoting, you're providing something that the medical establishment and sometimes even hospice with their one time a day visit can't provide or sustain that sense of support and care and that personalized service. Having been a hospice volunteer, there is, some basic relief support, but I can see how you bring in some conversation and some ability to allow a person to who the loved one who is dying to process what they need to process. And I'm not sure I've ever seen that in the hospice situation.
Yeah.
It's usually left to the family to support that person in that way. And they're having their own grief issues. So it's a lovely way to be there. And so I want to get to Bobby, your question.
I first of all, I'm a behavioral health counselor and a case manager, and I just sent someone to volunteer at Suncrest. I have never heard of this before, and I'm on just about every county committee there is. I'm in the facilities every day, and I just help somebody transition. I have never heard of your services, and I don't know why. I should have.
Yay.
Um, I mean, no, but
That's what we're here
it,
for, to connect.
but
So,
with respect to that, I'll ask my question in a minute. But with respect to that, among other things, um, I co-chair a group called ROSM, which is at the Multicultural Center every second Friday at 11 o'clock. We have every community service, every nonprofit, every social service agency, every county agency come together once a month to tell each other about what they provide in services and how they can benefit each other. And I would really like to have you come because this is an unbelievable opportunity for most people. I do want to ask, since you're contracted with Suncrest, do you exclusively work through them, or is this your own private practice, or how does it work?
great question. I only volunteer through Suncrest. So Suncrest deploys me to their patients when I have availability and they have a patient who they feel is in need of my services. I don't work for Suncrest at all. And Suncrest is happy to have me work independently, directly with patients. So if I go in as a volunteer and the patient would like to have my services, I will stop being a volunteer and I could sign a contract independently with that patient. So I work
And does
independently.
Medi-Cal or Medicare pay for that?
No,
I'm sorry for
Medicare
interrupting.
and Medi-Cal does not pay for any doula services.
Okay.
And it also, and I work through Marin Home Care also, which I just like to have as an option because as an employee of Marin Home Care, I am background checked and fingerprinted. And I just feel like because doulas are like there isn't, I'm certified also, just so you know, I have I have 2 certifications as a doula, but there isn't an oversight body, and it's not actually required that doulas are background checked and fingerprinted to work with the elderly. It is required for home care agencies to have all of their employees be background checked and fingerprinted. And so I work through Marin Home Care optionally. You can work directly with me. You can also work through Marin Home Care. And I just like to have that so that people know that I am background checked and fingerprinted and that they're bringing somebody who's gone through those hoops to make sure that your loved ones are safe. I think that that's important too. Peace
So
of mind.
your services are strictly private insurance paid.
They're not even paid. Private insurance doesn't cover it. They're strictly out of pocket.
So people make a contract with you personally for
Personally,
a
yep.
certain
And they
number
have
of
to
months.
pay out of pocket for my services, unfortunately. I am greatly looking forward to the day when hospice can provide Medicare, Medicaid will cover my services, but as of right now, they do not. So I also do pro bono work, of course. That's like where a lot of my work with like unhoused folks or people who are on Medicare, Medicaid comes from, is just doing it pro bono.
Could you put your email in the chat?
Of course. Yes, it's on our final slides.
Yeah, you'll get it, Bobby. So just before we move on to Nancy, do you know of any national effort to get doulas more regulated and also covered under either Medicare or insurance? You know, just much like it, I know that the hospice is, I think they advocated for acupuncturist
Yeah.
and maybe massage therapists to be covered at end of life care. Do you know of any effort like that yet, or is it not quite that big enough?
There are larger organizations like NEDA, NEDA. There are bigger groups of doulas. Indela is another one, but um, I think that the barrier is that doulas provide non-medical support.
Mhm.
And in the way that we currently think about death and dying, what insurance is willing to pay for is medical support. And
Yeah.
they're not seeing a lot of value in emotional and spirit. I mean, you guys know how hard it is to get therapy covered or anything like, mental health wise. They're not ready to see the value yet in spiritual, emotional, bereavement support. But I am hopeful, of course, yes.
Yeah. Nancy.
I saw Shoshana had her hand up. Would you,
Oh,
would you rather go first, Shoshana?
let me look. I don't.
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
Good. Good,
So
Shoshana.
far, this has been really very helpful. And I think one of the things that, from my background, I sang with the Threshold Choir, which is specifically taught to sing at the bedsides of
Yes.
people at the end of life or people in struggle. But mainly we sang at many hospice, for many hospice clients. I did it because I wanted to prepare myself for my own mom's passing. I started the choir in 2002 and I sang all the way through 2015 when my voice just unfortunately gave out. But and those years were remarkable. And the fear of death, I literally don't have any fear of death anymore. And I think that's what you're talking about, is helping people, because it's unknown country. If any of us have died and come back, it's fairly rare. And I've known some people with the near-death experiences, but my mom didn't actually pass away till 2008. So I was at her bedside singing for her, and I was prepared to say the least. So one thing I wanted to mention, as you mentioned, was the medical care that hospice provides. They can do drugs, they can do morphine, because I found with my mom, especially the end of life, a lot of times people go into a state of delirium or they're already in Alzheimer's. I call it walking between the worlds. They're not quite here, but they're not quite there yet.
Yes.
So I guess I was just wondering, in terms of your own experience, how many different tools do you have in your tool bag to prepare people for that and give them those tools so that they don't have to be so afraid?
Oh, that's such a good question, Shoshana. And thank you for doing the Threshold Choir. What a gift to so many people.
Mhm.
Gosh, I have this massive spreadsheet with like several tabs, of my resources. And that's just for like referrals for all different things. So I have like those tools, but I'm always working on my personal toolbox, like making sure that I integrate my own experiences as a caregiver. And that's something that I want to emphasize for all of
Yeah.
you, because you're all caregivers as well. You will be if you aren't now, you have been if you aren't now. But in order to do the work that we do, we have to give ourselves the care too, right? And so I work constantly on improving myself so that I can create the space and I can go into these places and provide the love and the abundance and the presence that these folks deserve. Um, So I don't like, I have a client right now who's amazing. He's a spiritual leader actually himself. And he said, he asked me like, when are you available for a meeting? And I gave him all this availability. And he said, well, the first thing I have to say is that that's too much availability. You're not taking good care of yourself. And I said, oh, don't worry. I'm giving you all of my windows, but you're only going to choose one, but we do have to make sure that we take really good care of ourselves. And, I'm always looking for more resources, and I have resources for everything from the very nitty gritty clinical. So I have a client, somebody who just reached out to me recently who is not on hospice, and they do not qualify for medical aid. Yeah, so they're not on hospice. This family reached out and they're not currently on hospice. And what they tried to do is they tried to directly qualify for medical aid in dying, which is like a death with dignity protocol here in California that's legal, where folks can take medicine to die, and they are already dying. People can only do this if they are already diagnosed with a terminal condition. There are multiple there are hoops that you have to jump through to make sure that you qualify for this protocol. What happened to this family was that their person was diagnosed originally with cancer. They went in to have some more scans. They did the radioactive dye. They discovered it wasn't cancer, but that they had lesions on the liver, and the quality of life for the person was very poor. Because they didn't have a cancer diagnosis, they couldn't qualify for medical aid in dying. The doctor was unwilling to sign off because she felt uncomfortable that there wasn't a clear diagnosis. They called me, which I was like, seemingly, I'm like, I am a non-medical person, but they were just overwhelmed, right? Like they were like, I don't know what to do. She's in a lot of pain. She's not qualifying. She wants medical aid in dying. This was it often doulas get called in like kind of an emergency panic. And so I got on the phone, understood more, and we talked about hospice as an option. And they didn't even know that they could potentially qualify for hospice, even if there isn't a diagnosis. And we talked about how to qualify for hospice. You can self-refer into hospice, meaning that like you can just go directly to a hospice and they will still have a doctor qualify you, but like you don't have to be referred by a physician. You can have a physician refer you. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting long-winded about this story, but my point was that I helped them figure out how to qualify for hospice, which was the first step. And then we talked about other options besides medical aid in dying. And we also talked about talking with the hospice doctor about potentially being one of the qualifying physicians for medical aid in dying. So what I did was basically come in as an experienced person who could help them problem solve the system a little bit and what they were trying to do, and present them with different options, and also let them know that even if like they were just, so much worry of like, well, what if we don't qualify? There were additional options available. So helping them feel like somebody was in their corner and that there were solutions available. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And all I did was a call. Like I'm still working with them. They've just now qualified for hospice, but we've had like 2 phone calls to get them feeling like they have a plan out of panic.
That's what a gift you gave them. That's tremendous. And that speaks to all the resources you also and your knowledge that you have just ready to go.
Yeah, well, and you guys know
Problem solved.
how complicated it is
Yeah.
with, and Bobby does with insurance and this agency and that agency and Medicare. It's like, it's so overwhelming that having someone who can kind of look across the whole thing and be knowledgeable and say like, insurance will cover this, Medicare covers this, hospice isn't like, and where do you find a hospice? They were located in a place where they didn't even know where to get a hospice. Were there options, that kind of stuff.
So you're a navigator too.
Yeah.
Nancy.
I wonder what your comment would be about this, Jessica. So I worked at what used to be called Hospice of Marin in the 80s and the 90s,
Yeah.
now called By the Bay Hospice.
Mhm.
When someone died, the nurse would go out and pronounce
Yes.
and remove all the medications.
Yes.
Fast forward to 2021, my husband died, and I used By the Bay, of course.
Yes.
But when he died, nobody came to pronounce, and
Oh,
left a ton of medication,
oh,
which I think is a very dangerous thing to do, to leave it behind in a patient's home. Now, I don't know if they did that because they knew of my hospice background or if that's how they do things nowadays. So anyway, do you do that? Do you pronounce, do you clean out the meds, or do you find that hospices do clean out the meds, or do you know?
those are great questions. I don't pronounce, but one of the reasons that I try to get everybody that I work with on hospice, even if they don't want anyone in their home, so that's a really common situation, is that people want privacy and they feel like by involving an agency like hospice that there's going to be like a train of people coming in and out all the time bothering them. So and if that's the case, again, the doula can act as a communicator with hospice and try to minimize the disruption, minimize the contact, you know, to make it possible. But one of the reasons I always want hospice on board is because they pronounce. And if you don't have hospice on board, supposedly the way it's supposed to work is that the police actually have to come, which is a lot of like weird energy in a situation where you've just lost a loved one. So thank you to the police for being willing to come out and do that. But you can imagine they have to fill out like a police report and stuff. And they're asking all these questions. And it can be really uncomfortable for the loved ones to have to go through all of that when they've literally like just lost their person. So hospice, on the other hand, can come out and pronounce. And that's usually a much gentler transition. Hospice generally does take the meds. By the Bay has gone through a lot of transitions, and I think that they're actually gonna maybe do one of these forums at some point with Sarah. So I think there will be an opportunity to dive way deeper into what they are and aren't doing these days. They just absorbed like 3 more independent hospices, so I know that things are like crazy. I tried to volunteer for them, and they were so busy that they couldn't take me for 9 months as a volunteer. So I know that they're stressed. And when were able to take me, they did let me know that they don't take doulas as volunteers. So they're just not able to handle, like they're overwhelmed is the feeling that I got. But in a good way also. I mean, they're doing amazing work. I'm not saying it. I don't want to say anything negative at all. Just they're coming and they will have good things to say about exactly what they provide. And any hospice is better than no hospice at all. Because again, like you guys pointed out, Shoshana, we don't provide medication. So doulas do not do that. And often in the end of life transition, you want medications to be available, and many hospices deliver those directly. So like you don't even need to be going to the pharmacy. They will bring them. They're available 24 hours a day for conversations. So if the pain level of the patient changes, you can call them. They'll send somebody out to double check and maybe even change the prescription and then send out the new prescription. And all of that is amazing. Sometimes it can take somebody knowing that they provide those services. That's again, like what is so great about having somebody there who's done it before to be able to say, you know, we can call them for this. I do that. We can call them to get a bedside commode. You can call hospice for medical equipment, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Hello?
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. I want to go back to, but I'm not quite sure how to ask a question about help assistant, medical assistant in dying. You don't do that, but how do you know how to get that kind of help if it's say something like Alzheimer's, person, it may not be, it may be more than
Yes.
months,
Yes.
and they don't want to go on beyond particular kinds of things that may mean that they would live longer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So what Flo is talking about is that for medical aid in dying, you have to be mentally competent in order to qualify. That's one of the qualifications. You have to have a terminal illness and you have to be mentally competent to make a decision. So with patients that are diagnosed with Alzheimer's or all forms of dementia, they typically don't qualify as mentally competent to make the decision. Canada, you might have seen recently, changed their rules so that you can do it in advance. They're the first ones to do that. Thank you, Canada.
Okay.
Canada, unfortunately. That's a very tricky situation. Some different doctors are different about what they'll qualify for. So like you have to get to the right doctor potentially to get them to sign, if that makes sense. But if you have an Alzheimer's diagnosis, no one will probably sign that you're mentally competent to pursue medical aid in dying. The option becomes,
Put in your advanced directive and all of that sort of
even if
thing.
it's in everything, they won't do it because they'll say that you weren't mentally competent to make the decision at the time of death, right? You can pursue voluntary stop eating and drinking, which is always an option to anyone, and you don't have to qualify for that. And that's basically a protocol where the patient decides that they're going to stop eating and drinking, and they'll pass away from a lack of nutrients and fluid in their body. And that option, yeah, is always available. Again, with a patient with Alzheimer's or dementia, that would be a family decision to discuss. And it would probably take a fair amount of coaching. And that person would still have to be on board with that decision, even in a dementia or Alzheimer's state. They would need to be on board with wanting to not eat or drink and to pass away. Because of course you wouldn't want to be doing that to somebody per se. Like, so it's kind of a tricky situation. I've been a part of multiple voluntary stop eating and drinking situations because as spiritual and difficult as medical aid in dying is, voluntary stop eating and drinking is even a little more challenging for families, just because it takes longer for the person to pass away. So the caregivers need to be present for that person for that whole period of time, which is usually 3 to 5 days if they stop eating and drinking completely. And it can be up to 2 weeks, if they're still eating and drinking a little bit. I don't mean to get into the minutia. I have a science background and a medical. I was an EMT for like 25 years. And I also have this side. So I always like to know both sides of a story. Like what's the medical that's going on? And then what's like what's the emotional that's going on? Yeah.
So where does somebody that's in that gray area find help?
If they're in the gray area, they would try to qualify first for medical aid in dying. So if they do not have a dementia, if they don't have an Alzheimer's diagnosis, or they may still be deemed mentally competent, they could try to qualify for medical aid in dying right away. They could actually fill the prescription. So they could qualify, they can fill the prescription, and they can hold on to that prescription for as long as they want to. Does that make sense?
Well,
yeah.
But it doesn't if they can't be diagnosed as going to die in 6 months.
Yes, that's correct. If they're non-terminal, then they won't be able to fill the prescription. It leaves them in the voluntary stop eating and drinking. Or if they're not going to be able to voluntarily stop eating and drinking and they're not going to qualify for MAID, unfortunately, it leaves them in a longer term care situation.
And that's at this point
that's still the option, unfortunately. Yes.
I just heard about there's some sort of new 2025 advanced directive around dementia. Do you know anything about that? I just heard that there is some sort of new form that's apparently trying to address this issue.
Ooh.
I don't know anything more about it than that, and I haven't had a chance to look at it.
I'll have to look for that. I don't, other than the new 2025 rule in Canada that does allow for like a very long-term advanced diagnosis.
Here in California.
No, I don't know about that. I'll look into that for sure.
Yeah, I'll look to Flo and see if there's anything I can send out with our resources after this forum.
Thank you.
Nancy.
Yes, me?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Did you have another question or comment?
No.
No. Okay. Okay, and Shoshana. You're on mute, Shoshana.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
To get my cursor over there. I just wanted to add that the threshold choir services are free.
Mhm.
There's no payment. We do it as entirely as volunteers. And, the companionship focus is really important. It's just quite miraculous, I think, to sing to people who are deep into dementia and Alzheimer's and haven't spoken in years, and then they start singing with us because the brain remembers these words. But we always say, no, let me call you sweetheart. I mean, things, that are from the past.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that I noticed the most, is that it's just not feeling like they're alone. And also for the families, it's really quite astonishing. I'm not sure there's any other organizations that actually do what we do, but started out locally in Marin County, and then it now is in, there's 2,500 women that sing all over the world. So chapters develop, and it's a service that I think is so beneficial. So you just have to contact threshold.org and we'll get you set up.
Thank you, Shoshana. I am so glad to hear that effort is growing and the people behind this singing at bedside. What a beautiful gift to bring in. So thank you for all the years that you did sing. So, Jody.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Jessica, how many other deaf doulas are you aware of in Marin? I mean, I know there are a few, and do you network together at all and get support from each other, just in terms of, and refer occasionally if your one's not available, and etc.?
Absolutely. Yeah, there are actually a lot of death doulas in Marin. I think there are a lot there. I find that the communication isn't necessarily great. Like not everybody, not everyone's online, or like how to find a doula is a little bit tricky, to Bobby's point of like, I've never seen you guys anywhere. I don't even know what this is. Like that is pretty common, I think. There are quite a few doulas, and we do network, and exactly for the reason that you said. I get calls. I got a call when I was on vacation with my family in Mexico, and often we're called in like an emergency, like it's like, I need you right now. And I was able to call kind of, like the phone tree, I put up the bats, I called my other contacts and I said, we need somebody, and they call until we can solve the problem. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
And there are also doula like consortiums. There are doulas that have decided that they work like exclusively together in a group, and you can hire that group for care, and you'll get someone or a different doula. It just depends. So there are some large consortiums of doulas. The East Bay Doula Consortium is the biggest.
Okay.
And because that's a really big network of doulas, Hospice by the Bay refers the East Bay Doula Consortium, because they can give like one name, and it's like a whole big group of people who can help. So there are there are tons of great doulas. And the other thing I would say to that is that, like we said, everyone's different. So you can find your doula too. Like if you could find a person who really resonates with you, who you think would be the right person to care for your loved one. Absolutely.
Yeah, great to hear. Thank you.
Bobby.
I just want to reiterate, I don't want you guys to go without me being able to reach you. I have access to every social service agency in Marin, and this is so vitally important, and it's such a blessing to have somebody do this, because this is what I do, but I just go from facility to facility, holding people's hands and taking care of their paperwork. And I've done it pro bono since 2011. And I really think you need to be introduced to Marin on a much larger scale. So please don't go without putting your emails in the chat.
All right. I put my email in the chat just in case, but we will also, I promise Sarah has a plan. We're going to follow up with some resources, and I have a resource page on the slides too, but I just popped it in there to make sure we connect. Yeah.
Okay,
And I put in her
Thank you.
website too, Bobby.
Thank you,
good.
Bobby.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
So we'll make sure you get it. Um, I'd like to, we haven't talked a little bit, and maybe you don't want to, but have you ever been asked to be part, I know you can't declare, but have you been asked to prepare the body and for vigil or for holding the space and the practical things around that? And in your experience with different families, there's so many different ways one can take those moments after death and maybe even the days and do either bring in ritual or ceremony or just speak to that, I think.
Yeah.
How do you help the family through those moments or plan for it?
I think that every family is different. I try to feel out like how comfortable the family members are with the idea of doing something with the body after the person passes. And some families are like, I want to close the door and I don't want to see anything that happens. Like I'm actually going to leave the house. Like I've had families like that before where they're like, okay, this is done. We need to leave this space. Like when we get back, please have the body gone basically. And like, I don't, I want to, and I'm going to sell the house, like I want nothing to do with this ever again. Um, I've also, and I mean, it's hard. So, you have to really like feel into like how the family feels and where it's right to push and where it's not. So I try to advocate for saying goodbye to the body, if they're comfortable. And I have sort of a go-to, plan for that I love. And I'm very flexible about like what other people would like, but basically what we do is after the person has passed, we sort of pause and take a moment to thank the body for all that it did. And we kind of recognize in this that the body is not the person anymore. This is the body, but this was a body that maybe held us, that maybe birthed us, that maybe was our friend. And depending on how comfortable people are, they would have different roles in this process. So if somebody is a little less comfortable, maybe their job is that they're going to bring some towels so they feel like they're helping. Maybe their job is that they're going to go get some flowers so that they're helping, but they're not touching. Okay. And for people who are more comfortable, maybe like intimately acquainted with this person and have been caregiving for them, we do a little ritual washing of the body. And we say, like, I have sort of something that they can repeat after me if they want to, of just saying, thank you to these hands for holding me. Thank you to these arms. As we wash the body, we say thank you to each part. And then we kind of, we lovingly wrap the body. And I'm kind of taking care of like the business parts of that are like making sure that the eyes are closed and that the mouth is going to stay closed and like some of that stuff. But they're able to say thank you and goodbye. And we put like maybe flowers around the body to make it really beautiful. And we wrap it in something really nice. And then if the family wants to and we've planned it, they can also have people come and say goodbye at that time. Like we can let people know that the body is here and they can come and say a last goodbye. You can hold the body for different amounts of time, depending on like which little things you've done in advance. And if you're going to hold the body for quite a while, of course, we would put the body on ice. In certain traditions, the body is held for up to 3 days on ice at home, which we can do. And that gives people an opportunity to say goodbye to the body and to come and say farewell. And sometimes people, they want to lay with that person. It can be nice to put them somewhere where people can lay next to them and just say goodbye, and give a lot of closure. So I'm sorry, I'm wandering because it just depends. Like, so I've seen it
Sure.
be where people want the body to be present for 3 days and then ice is more involved. But if this is like, we're going to keep the body for a couple of hours, and we're just going to call these people and they're going to come now, we've also done that.
And do you find that most family members, even though you may have had death discussions with them about what they might want that really they may not know until the moment?
Sometimes, usually if we're doing a good job of like really talking about it from our hearts and getting everybody ready, they
Mm.
know.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, they know. And a lot of what I try to do is to help people like reframe somebody's death from being the ultimate tragedy of their life to like what we can do. So here's a story. So I had a friend who her mom was passing, and it had been really difficult. Her mom had been passing for more than a year, just getting more and more frail from cancer, bedridden. And the doctors just kept kind of saying, you know, it could be a week, it could be 6 more months. And it was like this limbo that she just felt anguished by, right? Because it's like she had anticipatory grief. She also had guilt because this was like costing a fortune. And like there were feelings about that, but also it was like her mom, you know? So it's like there's so much happening there.
Mhm.
And she didn't want her mom to go to die, you know? And so we had this conversation and I said, "So what's your goal?" And she said, "For my mom not to die." And I'm like, your mom is now 82 pounds. You know, your mom is 100% gonna die. And that's not like what I led with, right? But
Sure.
I said, like, we need to refocus that goal because you're not going to be successful. And no matter how long this takes, that goal is setting you up to have a miserable experience. So, and she was like, "Well, what other goal could there possibly be?" Which I can totally see, right? You're like, "What other goal could there be than my person not dying?" And I said, "Well, how about a good death?" You know, and then this is very, you know, where you're doulaing, everyone can be a doula, right? I was like, "What does that look like?" And we had and I said, "What does that look like to you? And what do you think that that looks like to her?"
Mhm.
Um, and we talked about it and I made some suggestions, like maybe a death without pain, you know? And so we came to kind of a place where her goal could refocus on a good death, meaning a death without pain, a death with family, a death that was a life that was well lived, knowing that you loved and that you are loved. And so we talked about how we could do that for her. And it was like a total miracle, divine intervention. But we finished this conversation, and as we're finishing, she gets a phone call, and the nurse is calling saying, you know, she's got breakthrough pain. The mom has breakthrough pain, and the medication is not enough, and that they want permission to give her more. And immediately, my friend starts crying, and she's like, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, this is terrible." And I said, "Why is it terrible?" And she said, "Because she's in pain and it's getting worse." And I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And she said, "You know, I want her to not be in pain." And I said, "Okay, so she should have the more medicine, right? Like first things first, say yes to the nurse, you know?" And she's like, "Yes, we're going to push more medicine." And then I said, "You know, if the goal is for her to die well and without pain, you've pushed more medicine. And as you pointed out, this means that there's progress actually towards her dying. Like she is moving towards where she needs to go to be free from all of this." And it was like her mind just was like, you know, this was exactly what she needed. And she said that just this one conversation that we had and this learning to reframe basically reframed the entire rest of her mom's passing so that she could see it as that they were working towards a death without pain, a merciful death with dignity that could come as quickly as possible for her mom because her mom was no longer really totally present. She was already in the process of crossing that threshold. So she wasn't talking anymore, you know. Anyway,
I appreciate that you
sorry about
shared that story because I know there are many more you must have in your memory, and yet I think that encapsulates the skill and gifts and sense of understanding and peace that you bring to families and the loved ones. So thank you. And I'm wondering if there's, I'm going to ask Nancy to comment or question, but maybe there's some individual stories in this room that people might want to share, or experiences, or thoughts based on what you've seen and been through. Nancy, oh, did you take your hand down, Nancy?
I'll ask the question later.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just, at the end, I know this is not the emotional part, but Jessica, if you could talk something about how much you cost, or how much is a death doula.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll cover that at the end. And then Shoshana.
Yeah, long before I joined Trust Road Choir, I started on a spiritual path, kind of an alternative group of people, all about spirit, not about religion, not about labels. But I was walking with a friend, jogging along the bike path in Mill Valley, and we were near the houseboats, and she pointed to one and she said, "That's where my brother's friend Bobby lived." And she said he had been found on the track at Tam High School unconscious, and they brought him into Marin General, and they found he had a brain bleed, and he pretty much had no brain left.
Yeah.
And so we decided we would go and visit him because he was still alive. And there was a woman sitting in the room, and she was, it turns out she was Bobby's girlfriend's mom. And she was sitting alongside him and stroking his forehead. And she's, she was just like really hopeful that he would recover and marry her daughter, and everybody would be happily ever after. And I don't know how I knew this, but I knew I had to say to her that he wasn't going to come back and that she needed to let him go. It's the exact words I said. And I felt like I had smacked her in the face, because she gave me this anguished look and just, well, I won't come anymore. And I said, you still can come, but you have to let him go. And those ties of love and grief are so strong that the spirit really cannot move on until you do your work of letting the people know that it's okay to let them go. And that next morning I got a call that he had passed away. So work on that for sure, because it's a very important connection. It's not woo-woo, it's just energy, and it's love, and it can be stronger than steel to hold that person.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think that one of the things about being a doula that reminds me of, I love that story, is that, it's our job to be of service and figure out what our clients' beliefs are, So even I have my own personal beliefs, about what happens and whatever, but often I'm just trying to figure out, like, what is their belief, and if there's something that's holding someone back from crossing the threshold, like some unfinished business. Like sometimes I do have a person who's, it's like they have an unfinished something. And one of the things that I do is try to understand what that might be, gently asking questions, is there somebody that you want to talk to? Is there somebody missing? Because sometimes people, I'm sure Bobby has seen this a lot as well, but sometimes people have something that they do want to do, something that's like bothering them. And even though they're very far along, like they may be that, they're probably seeing loved ones in the room with them that aren't there. And like sometimes something stops them from making progress. And if you can ask the right questions, you can figure out what that is and help that happen for them. And then you're just like you said, it's like they feel like they're ready.
They're
It's
done.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's
and
amazing.
My next door neighbor, that happened to her. She was waiting for her grandson who was in Japan. And as soon as he showed up and, the family was there, everybody was
ready.
cool. And she just let go. And it was truly wonderful. So
I love that. Yeah, that's a
so
beautiful.
finding those answers is really so important. And thank you for doing that. This has been so wonderful to revisit the work. And I'm going to call No One Dies Alone, because I want to start getting into something again related.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, Jessica, that reminds me also, my cousin's husband, who had pancreatic cancer as a 48-year-old, and died within 2 years. He was at his mother-in-law's home and in bed and progressing, and they thought he only had a few days, but he had something he needed to do, and that was to, because the property was also his, he wanted to build a awning for his daughters to get married under, because at that point they were only in
Yeah.
elementary school. And darned if he didn't get out of that bed and in 3 days had a work crew build this awning specifically for the future of his daughters. And the minute that last bit was put on and flowers were planted around it, he went back up to that bed and died the next day. So
Wow.
I guess my question is, there might be times where there's something very important to the person who is in the process of passing and leaving this world. And it is important to find that out if there's any way to allow them to have that happen. Maybe their will won't get them as far as my cousin's husband, but giving them some peace as they go, whether it's to say goodbye to somebody or take care of some important conversation or business.
Absolutely.
I think of that as another lovely gift to give someone who is in the process of, moving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or just, yes. And to say that they're loved, and like they will also, like there are some things that are repeated in it's amazing, but like in people across the world, right, have similar experiences as they transition, like this thing of being visited by people. A lot of people start talking about going on a journey, right? They get a little bit agitated when they're right towards the end, and they start talking about packing sometimes, or needing tickets, or like they're like they know they're going somewhere. And there's, that feeling you get when you're traveling. It's like you're anxious because you're like, people will start to kind of have that, and they'll literally like go to try to put on their shoes when they haven't gotten out of bed in like a week, and they're like, I need my shoes. And I think one of the things that's really great about just knowing that that's a thing, right? And being able to tell the family, like I've been with families and they're like, oh my God, like, dad is trying to get out of bed and get on a train. And again, being able to be like, yes, this is the big train. This is not like this is not an actual train. He's talking about leaving. And he has the feeling that he's going, being able to settle everybody that this is normal. I mean, I can't tell you how far just the mental load can come down from having somebody be able to say, this is okay. This is normal. This is progress, even when it might look like and is agitation or some, you know what I mean? Because some of this stuff, like you guys have been bedside, it's not pleasant. But having somebody be there with you to hold your hand and say like, this is okay, they're okay, and we're okay. And like we're doing a thing that's hard. Again, just like watching somebody give birth, good God, right? Somebody needs to say like, they're actually going to be okay. This is okay. For death, the same thing. That transition really can use having someone to be able to help, I guess.
I do think Barry comments that he doesn't see this as a sad thing. It's a transition. And that gets back to our fear and our cultural and societal, I guess, story that this death is so separate from our process of living. And I do see a movement, with the death cafes that somebody else mentioned that take place, these, normalizing the conversations around death, dying, our fears, to make it more, to help us settle into it, and to also help us to give us reflection on the importance of life and making the most of every moment. So,
I think Nora wanted to say something.
oh, please, Nora, go ahead. Thank you, Bobby.
I wish you were around in my life when my mother was passing. She was in hospice, and my sister and I were not in accord about what should happen. And
Oof.
what she wanted, what my mother wanted to let go, was her apartment was still, she was staying at my sister's. We had the hospice bed moved into my, but her apartment was still there. And
Mhm.
she was so concerned about all the art objects and various personal things that were there. And she wanted to make sure, she wanted to know they were going to certain family members, very specific family members. And I get busy when I'm in, when there's a job to do. So I'm over there packing things up and getting things stored and calling people on the phone. And do you want this? And do you want that? And my sister was so angry with me. She said, "You're like, they're like vultures. Everyone's taking all her stuff. She isn't even dead yet." She was
Yeah.
way into the morphine and way at the end of life.
Yeah.
And so what we needed was someone like, and the hospice nurse was like, you girls need to settle this. And I'm like, we needed some serious mediation help with that. So
Yes.
what kind of back and forth could you do when family members don't agree how the end is supposed to go?
Good
It
question.
happens all the time. I'm sure you all know that, unfortunately. The best thing that we can do is try to come to get to it earlier, right? The ideal situation is always like if before the person starts to be actively dying and they're on the morphine and everything, like if we can figure out those things in advance, that's the best. I'm sure that you've learned that and now you're like, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure it out in advance. So the best thing is to do it in advance. When it doesn't happen in advance, absolutely. The doula can mediate. The doula can bring in a mediator. The doula can lean on the social worker from hospice if that person is good at that. The doula can also, yeah, like call in a professional mediator. Like if it's bad, I have totally called in mediators for families in dispute over property. Like where it is like a fierce dispute, and in the meantime what I've done is I've created a visitation like schedule where they don't visit together, but everybody feels like they get time with the person so that the person isn't caught in the crossfire of the disagreement that's going on. So trying to kind of get it two-pronged, bringing in a mediator to have those meetings if it's over my head, which like oh, I mean, yeah, a lot of that is, especially if I'm caring for a person who is transitioning. So I'll get a resource to help. And then making sure that there's a visitation schedule, or that like in the case of you and your sister, like if you're getting along well enough that you can agree not to bring it in the room, like that could work. But I've had it where families really can't, and they're literally bringing people in to witness new wills that they're trying to have the person sign. Like, so I've had to kind of like control the space a little more and have people come in on a schedule.
I think our issue is more of her not letting go.
Of course.
And
That sounds like that's what
she
it was.
she did not want to honor mother's wishes because it
She
appeared
wasn't
like
ready to let go. Well, and I feel like she probably needed a more she probably didn't need a mediator, right? She probably needed a hug from someone and to hear like how very hard this was, and to ask like, was there a schedule in which she would be ready? And sometimes just asking that question maybe would have made her realize no, she was never going to be ready. And would it be better if you did it? Or would she like, just asking a million, I'm like just asking a lot of questions. And you probably just were not, you were so close to it and so close to her that you probably couldn't do that. Sometimes it takes another person coming in to ask those things.
and I was just trying to satisfy my mother's wishes.
Of
That's what I was
course.
responding to.
Of
So
course.
it wasn't really about the property. It was about
Right.
the to give up the apartment and give things away meant we gave up on her, and that was not at all my intention. It
Of
certainly wasn't what my
course.
mother wanted.
It's so hard. And I think, yeah, sometimes it's so hard. I mean, it's so difficult on families to let somebody go. I think my question for you would have been, this is what your mom wants, but will she care if you do it next month or right now? If your sister does care.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you probably would have been like, okay, if that's what this is, if that's what it takes for us to get along, great. Like we'll do, it's just so very, very hard sometimes to have those conversations. You're reminding me that another thing that's also difficult with family conversations is sometimes actually whether or not somebody is dying is actually unclear. So that's another one where doulas can be helpful in having conversations, because sometimes the dying person isn't super comfortable, and we can talk to them about what they want to say and get them ready, and then have a conversation. Like, then they can talk to their kids about it. Communication is definitely something that a doula can help with. And sometimes I think really that it's just having someone who isn't in the family, because everyone in the family is grieving. You were in the thick of that anticipatory grief with your sister.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm so sorry that you went through that.
Thank you, Nancy.
Jessica, this has just been beautiful, a wonderful discussion, and you've covered so many different aspects of this end of life planning, this end of life experience. And I want to thank everyone who shared your questions and your own stories. And Shoshana, it's so lovely to hear about the choir. And is there anything, Jessica, you want to wrap up with before we close out this forum?
Two things. I want to answer Nancy's question about what doulas cost, and then I
Yeah.
have one more thing I want to say really quick.
Good.
I don't like doulas charge a wide variety of amounts for their services. I charge in packages, but I charge about $100 an hour, which I know is not super inexpensive. But I also operate on a sliding scale, so I've never turned anyone away for any reason. Um, but it is nice to charge something, because then people also appreciate the time that you're spending. And I have found that if I charge too little, then I'm asked to like do the dishes and clean the floor and like all the 800 things that need to be done, because everyone's like overwhelmed. So instead I try to charge a little more for my time and for the experience, and then help them get lower cost resources to do things that they need done like around the house. So I hope that answers that question. And then I just wanted to say in closing, that in the end, death isn't really just about an ending like we talked about. It's about love and legacy and how we show up for each other. And I hope that you have left. It seems like this is an extraordinary group of people who are so open and grounded, but ready to have these conversations with people that need to have conversations about how they want to go and what is necessary, and to die with intention. And I appreciate all of you for being here, for asking questions, for being present for this, and for being present for your loved ones, and even the community. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of community servants here, so I appreciate you all.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I appreciate it. Blessings.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jessica.
I'm
And
going to put two resources in the chat that my co-host Jody found. They're not necessarily related to the specifics of today, but they're just an additional resource. 10 reasons not to plan your funeral. And was the other one also 87 reasons not to plan your funeral? Jody, maybe you speak
No,
before you found
the
these.
other one, actually, I'm glad I have a minute to just mention. The
Yeah,
other one's
yeah, please.
87 things you need to do when somebody passes.
Oh, I got
But
the wrong
it
title.
is quite dated, actually. So it doesn't have, for instance, things about passwords and some of the more recent things. I mean, it's all relevant to look over, but it's just a flyer I ran across many
There we go.
years ago that's helpful. And to be thinking about that before, again, somebody passes, so you have a lot of that information and at your fingertips, who to contact, death certificates, all that those kinds of things, which I'm sure a doula can also prep you for, if there's time. So just be sure that those things are coming together. And then the one about the funerals is just a bit funny in a way, but it's a good one to read through.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Jody. So I will be sending out a link to the recording, which actually I'll be doing tonight because we had several people who couldn't be here today. And I will clip out that wonderful view of what birth doulas see that we got in there, whoever decided that was important for us to see. Well, I'll clip that bit out, but yeah, so in a follow-up email from Eventbrite, you'll get a link to the video, you'll get these two resources again, and again, Jessica's information. I want to also say that our next forum is called Expanding Our Thinking About Falling. So on April 25th from 10 to 11:30. It'll be a Friday. Usually we have these on Wednesdays, but because of the speaker availability, we're doing in the next one on a Friday. Chrissy Waller, who is a physical therapist and a board certified specialist in neurologic physical therapy, who works occasionally at Vivalon, running fall balance programs, is going to talk about how you can reduce your risk of falling. She'll offer a self-assessment you could do at home, talk about potential issues that you would identify that could lead to falling more often, and help you with strategies on how to get up. And the two other hosts are age and disability friendly Marin leaders, who will also be with Chrissy, will be talking about Feldenkrais and Tai Chi and some other programs that are available in Marin in the Bay Area. So we'll see you on April 25th.
April 25th, what time?
April 25th from 10 till 11:30. And Eventbrite will send out a reminder of that coming up. Let's all thank Jessica.
One quick thing, could you cut and paste the chat so we could have a copy of that when you send out the recording?
Oh, the whole chat? Sure.
Yeah. And
Sure.
also Vivalon.org has the balance classes. I have taken it, and I've taken it with Christy. They're fabulous, and and anybody can take classes at Vivalon. You don't have to be 65 or over. We're at 999 3rd Street in San Rafael. There's parking right across the street. So anyway, those are two really valuable resources.
I actually teach that class at Vivalon.
All right. Yes, I thought I recognized you. Playing games too.
Right.
A talented group. Jessica, thank you again. What a lovely hour and a half we've spent with you, and so wonderful to meet you and to hear about your work. And I think your point about having to charge for the skills you bring is a really good one. But I appreciate that you have a sliding scale too for those in our community that need the same kind of care but can't afford it. So thank you. Thank you for all that you do. All right.
Thank you.
Do the best, everybody. Have a lovely
Wonderful.
afternoon or lovely day.
Thank you. And you too.
Thank you.
Wonderful.